Lots of talk over the weekend that this, World War III could be starting. It's on some of the front pages still. Is it that serious, or is this a diplomatic and military incident that can be contained?
Contained is the right answer. Excuse me. One of the things whereby it's fairly limited in its real implications, although it does exceed the usual boundaries of business in the Middle East. The Iranians have got a very clear sense of where they stand in the military and strategic food chain, and they'll act on the basis of that. Anything they do is more likely to be through proxies rather than directly.
Well, indeed, we know that's one of the issues why Qassem Soleimani was such a big target. Because let's be honest, if anyone being actually honest, most people hadn't, including myself, hadn't heard of this guy, the Iranian general, effectively number two, more powerful than the president, just sort of number two effectively to the supreme leader, Khamenei. But the key thing is that he has been waging these proxy wars. He's been the mastermind behind all these terror attacks on American troops, on British troops, and these proxy wars being fought throughout the Middle East. Iran, just this constant sort of war of attrition with the Saudis, with the Israelis and with the Americans and the Brits. Do you think things will get a lot worse before, if they ever do get better?
Well, worse is a relative condition. They're always getting worse. It's kind of like a rising musical scale and never actually reaches the end. I think the main point here is that it's going to change the tone, certainly for a measurable interval. The point about with Soleimani is that he was head of something called Quds Force, which is the organisation which runs these proxy wars on Iran's behalf. And consequently, one, he's a linchpin player in that respect. Two, Quds Force is part of the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, which tend to play a bit of a lone hand very often, very separately from the regular military and the regular intelligence community. And the point here is that this means that the Corps may try to take the law into its own hands on certain things. It sometimes does actions, and then the Iranian government has to fall in line behind because they can't deny them. And whether or not the attacks will be a coherent effort by the central government, which isn't that coherent in the first place, or will be the Guard Corps kind of embarrassing everybody else into following suit, which would mean that the Guard Corps would work through what it has, which is its proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, and the militias in Iraq. I know they've got the armature to go after someone like Bush or any of his cabinet while they're in the US. But they might be able to go after fairly senior officials while they're in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the concern. But I mean, a lot of what's happened since, a lot of people talking about, obviously British troops. We've got 400 British troops in Iraq who've been training the forces there to fight against Islamic State. They've had to abandon that training mission after the Iraqi parliament voted for all US-led forces, including British troops, to leave. The Iranians have said they're going to tear up the 2015 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Pact, and Tehran, obviously, these death to America chants and the like from people there. But a lot of this is already happening, isn't it? The reality is that nuclear pact was already dead in a ditch after the Americans pulled out. We already have seen, the Iranians waging these proxy wars. Is there an element where the failure to take out people like Soleimani has been the problem rather than taking him out? Because actually the lack of retaliation by America, particularly under Obama, who a very popular president here in the UK, but someone who did leave a massive power vacuum in the Middle East, particularly with Syria. And we did see, Iranian forces and Russian forces and others get involved as a result of that. Is there an argument that actually this is an act of war, effectively, that the Americans should have taken sooner?
Not usually. What people like to do is leave known figures in place where they're a bit more predictable and can be managed, or even people you can talk to and reason with. Every time you reshuffle the leadership, you don't know who you're dealing with or how it's going to play out.
Better the devil you know.
Yeah, to a very real degree. It complicates things in ways that are not always going to be helpful. And you got to keep in mind that Iran's a pretty modern bureaucracy in organizational terms, despite its internal divisions. And so you can replace a Soleimani just like you can replace a chief of defense staff. It's a problem, it's a crisis, but it's not a catastrophe. and that the Iranians are going to be able to recover that way. I think you're right in terms of the sense that it reflects a sense of escalation that probably should have been, the Americans might have wished to have been more concrete about earlier. People are talking a lot about the militias trying to raid the American embassy in the Green Zone, but you have to also keep in mind the way in which the Americans were tracing weapons used by the Houthis to attack the Saudi Arabians, principal ally in the region, directly back to Iran rather than the kind of amorphous international arms trade.
Okay. Just finally, can I ask you about the Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, the British Iranian mother held in jail in Tehran? Right. All attempts so far to negotiate her return to the UK have failed. Big concerns raised by Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, yesterday in interviews on the Sunday shows. Do you think her position is now more precarious as a result of what's happened?
I think it's more intractable. There'll be less likely to be movement on it at this point. On the end, the Iranians are canny, and they might use it as an inducement to try and create divisions between the UK and the US.
Yes, OK. Although, of course, I'm not as sympathetic as we are, and we're going to be talking to her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, later in the show, whether or not our entire sort of Middle East policy should be based on one Brit abroad, I suppose, would be a concern for some people. You have to build policy around the big picture. And sometimes I think one of the degree which the limited nature of the British response has been governed by the fact they're trying to juggle a lot of other balls in the air besides that very tragic case. Indeed. Today, back in Westminster, there's going to be a decision by the Labour NEC, their ruling body, on, the leadership contest that is to come, as Jeremy Corbyn has said that he will stand down when a new leader is in place. 5 candidates have formally declared: Sir Keir Starmer, Emily Thornberry, Lisa Nandy, Jess Phillips and Clive Lewis. Not an official declaration yet from Rebecca Long-Bailey or indeed Ian Laver, although 2 of the names mentioned an awful lot last week. But let's talk about that leadership contest now with Labour MP for Poplar and Limehouse, Jim Fitzpatrick. Good morning to you, Jim.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. And of course, I mean, you
former Labour MP.
You're right, former. I was just going to say. I was reading it out. I'm thinking, surely former Labour MP. You've been trying to stand down for ages, right? All these elections that keep being called at the last minute. Now, look, even though as a former MP, of course, you still have a say as a Labour Party member, and obviously union members and others, or other organisations attached to Labour Party get a say. There's a lot of talk at the moment about whether or not the Labour Party has learnt the lessons from the general election in December. The lessons, as I see it, as a political commentator, are that moving very far left and radical isn't really where most of the British electorate are, and trying to deny implementing a democratic vote for Brexit also isn't where the British people are. Is there any evidence from the declarations from the candidates so far that those lessons have actually been learned?
I'm not sure that there has been, Julia. Most of the candidates seem to be either blaming our devastating defeat in December on Brexit, or on the manifesto being too heavy, or on the media, or on personal attacks on Jeremy Corbyn. There just doesn't seem to be an acceptance that we lost touch and that we are responsible. It's not anybody else's fault. And until we actually say that, then we're going to continue to be out of touch with the British people.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the worry, isn't it? I mean, even, Emily Thornberry, clear Remainer, campaigning, for the party to have a formally Remain stance. Sir Keir Starmer, the shadow Brexit secretary, he was on the Sunday shows yesterday talking about how the party needs to have a much clearer stance rather than the sitting on the fence second referendum stance. What he means by that, clearly, I mean, he when pushed wouldn't say it, but he definitely didn't mean a pro-Brexit stance, did he? He meant a Remain stance.
No, that's right,
And Jess Philip, someone who represents a strongly Leave voting constituency, a backbench MP, very popular in the media, and very popular among Labour MPs. But she's saying that she could consider a position in the future where she campaigns to rejoin the EU. I mean, I have to say, watching some of those interviews yesterday, I sort of found myself head on desk time. Like, why don't they get it? What is it just that so many of these people in your party live in a bubble and they just don't listen to what the electorate says, or they just generally think the electorate's stupid and got it wrong?
Well, clearly some of them genuinely believe that. But in reality, I don't really think it matters. Whoever is the new leader isn't going to win an election in 2023, 2024 because the majority that the Conservatives have is 80 at the moment. It'll probably go to 100 when boundary changes kick in. No opposition leader has ever achieved anything like the swing needed. So it'll be 2027, 28 or 29. So whoever becomes leader this spring isn't going to be prospectively the Prime Minister. It's about leading the party back to a common sense position. And as you say, the denial statements which are coming out of all the main candidates so far means that we don't seem likely to even be approaching the centre ground of British politics.
No, indeed. I mean, something of a poisoned chalice, I would argue. And in terms of the likelihood of there being a Corbynista continuity candidate, Rebecca Long-Bailey was the person being touted. I mean, there was not an appearance by John McDonnell or by Jeremy Corbyn during the election when she wasn't by their side. She appeared to be the anointed one, and now there's been some considerations that actually she's not that popular with party membership, that talk about her firing some of Corbyn's closest advisors, Carrie Murphy and Seamus Mill, and now Ian Lavery, the party chairman, former leader of the NUM, being put forward as perhaps the continuity Corbynista candidate. It's looking like a bit dog-eat-dog out there.
Well, the hard left spend years winning positions, and once they've won them, they do not surrender them. They hold on to them. That's the reason why Jeremy Corbyn is seen as leader, to make sure that the transition is to a continuity candidate, whatever the hard left decide that will be. And of course, given the membership profile as it is, there's every likelihood that Momentum can deliver a continuity candidate. And in that instance, this is all about not letting go of the stranglehold they have over the Labour Party and hoping that the Tories throw it away at the next general election and the public let their guard down, so as the Labour Party let our guard down, a hard left take over.
Yeah, well, I suppose it was counting on the fact that the NHS won't exist, as we've been told, with the Tory government. We won't have an NHS. And then, of course, the next general election, they can clearly campaign to bring the NHS back. So that'll be nice and easy win for them. Jim Fitzpatrick, former Labour MP for Poplar and Limehouse, thank you very much indeed. Let's turn our attention back to Iran now with Tobias Ellwood, Tory MP and former Defence Minister. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, Boris Johnson has finally returned to the UK from his holiday in Mystique, and he's spoken for the first time about the attack, the drone attack that killed Qassem Soleimani, the Iranian general, on Friday. And he said that Britain will not lament his death, and said that he had played a role in the deaths of thousands of innocent people and was a threat to all our interests. Very difficult balancing act there at the moment to try and ease tensions, protect British foreigners, British people abroad, British troops in a neighbouring Iraq, but also to keep on side with our biggest military and economic ally in America.
Yeah, you make such an important point, but let's not forget who Soleimani was. I think most of the world perhaps wasn't so aware of this person being the most powerful man in uniform in the Middle East. He was the mastermind in promoting Iranian proxy influence. He had his own private army. He was able to fund, train and arm paramilitary groups across the Middle East and cause interference with Gaza through supporting Hamas, in Lebanon with Hezbollah. People will be familiar with that. Obviously in Syria and Iraq, he had the People's Mobilization Forces. He's responsible for them. And of course, the Houthis in Yemen. It's difficult to think of another character that has been so divisive. So when the opportunity came, because apparently an attack was imminent, the Americans took the shot. But I must respond, if I may, just to your little barb at the beginning about the Prime Minister being on holiday. It's worth pointing out that whenever any Prime Minister goes anywhere in the world, he takes a mini ops team that tie into the local embassy. He would be well aware of events as they unfolded. He was able to speak to the President of the United States and the other leaders and give strategic direction for which operationally back in London they were then executed.
I have to say, I cared no hoots whatsoever about him taking a holiday. People deserve. I've just come back myself. People go on holiday. I think perhaps people might have expected a statement a little sooner, but I've got no issue. We know perfectly well that the world keeps turning and these things are going. And Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab was handling things back in the UK. The question is now, what does happen now? Because our 400 British troops in Iraq, neighbouring Iraq. They've been told basically get out, can't continue their training mission tackling Islamic State in that country. We know that when the chance of death to America and the burning of American flags happens, it's always, it's British flags. We are very much seen as the little Satan alongside Israel with big Satan America. There are going to be threats now to our troops. There are going to be threats to our embassies. There are going to be threats to British holidaymakers abroad in the Middle East. People returning to Egypt on holiday. Sharm el-Sheikh regarded as somewhere safe to go. No, that's going to now be somewhere that's at risk. What happens next? How do we make sure that Brits are kept safe?
Again, such an important question. There's what happens in the immediate next couple of weeks, next few days, and we are expecting reprisals. And absolutely, we've taken the necessary measures to make sure that our embassies, our military personnel, tourists, and other commercial operations are as safe as they can be. But you talk about why there hasn't been a prime ministerial statement earlier. I think everybody was taken by surprise by the removal of such a pivotal totemic character that it's taken perhaps a bit of time just to assess what actually happens next. Is it
a worry, though, that we were taken by surprise and that Britain wasn't informed in advance?
No, again, much was played over this, an acute parochial, decision that was made, and then people are making a massive judgment about the British-American relationship. We've been involved in operations where intelligence has been very, very fluid. You had to act on it. There isn't simply the time to go through the normal protocols. And the consequence is that we were not in the loop at the time. I wouldn't read anything into that at all. I think that would be unhelpful. What I would say, though, is that the wider picture his removal makes is the fundamental question as to why there has been so much instability in the Middle East. And it's because Iran has fueled this sectarian difference right across the piece. And the question now is, with his removal, is this an opportunity for us to re-engage, to be less risk-averse, and to stand up to countries such as Iran that have a foreign policy, an interventionist foreign policy that has sowed so much division across all the way up to the Mediterranean.
Do you think that the Middle East and the world generally is a safer place or a less safe place? Was it the right strategic decision by the Americans to take out this guy? Because at the end of the day, look, most of us hadn't heard of him, had no idea of his massive significance, but we knew about Iranian proxy wars. Those were going to happen anyway. They will probably continue to happen. Are we now less safe as a result of that?
We are. This depends on what actually happens now. There's a chain of reaction taking place. And as I say, the wider picture is this Cold War that's existed, been fueled by Iran of actually promoting a divide between the Sunni and Shia communities, and which is actually inconsistent because when any doctrinal differences between the two are actually very, very slim indeed. Both see absolutely the Prophet Muhammad as being central to their theology. And what Soleimani and indeed the Supreme Leader have done is use this as a political banner to cause so much ethnic division. The opportunity now in the longer term, which is why it's a long way of saying I agree that his removal will make the Middle East safer, is what actually happens next. Are we able to strive further towards actually doing what the Iranian people want, which is less interference of Iran with its neighbors? The Iranian people have been demonstrating. Many of them actually get clobbered for it. They actually get, the armed forces are called out and they actually disperse. But the Iranian people do not want their regime interfering and spending money, billions of dollars, on proxy wars. They want that money spent and invested in Iran, where the economy is not doing well, where unemployment is rising, and where they actually want to have a more collaborative, prosperous relationship with the rest of the world.
Obviously, the Prime Minister's returned from his holiday. He's made his first statement last night about the assassination of Soleimani, and he said that Britain will not lament his death. He played a role in deaths of thousands of innocent people and was a threat to all our interests. However, it's been quite clear from the interviews that your boss, the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, has done over the weekend, that there is some concern that this decision by the Americans to launch this drone attack could actually heighten tensions and cause more risks to the Middle East and indeed to Brits abroad, both troops and tourists as well. Do you think it was the right decision by Donald Trump to order that assassination?
Well, that's a matter for Donald Trump. What I will say is the US has made a statement around this, obviously, as you would expect, and it's made it very clear the reason it has taken this action is because they had clear evidence that Soleimani was plotting imminent attacks on US diplomats and personnel, and that the US has the legitimate right of self-defense and to defend its people, which I think is a concept well understood in international law, and that's a position that they have outlined. So they will say that, quite contrary to the position you've laid out, that the action they have taken has protected their nationals, and by extension, since we work very closely with the Americans in Iraq, our own.
Well, indeed, I mean, there's lots of criticism from the left, from leading members of the Labour Party, that this is state-sanctioned assassination, that this is actually possibly leading to World War III and putting more British lives at risk, and indeed the lives of innocents in the Middle East at risk as a result of this. I asked you whether you thought this was the right decision or not. You said this was a matter for Donald Trump, but surely as a representative in the Foreign Office, you must have an opinion on whether this was the right decision or not.
Well, the consequences of this we'll have to see as this plays out. What I can tell you is, in terms of what we're doing now for our own nationals, we are doing everything in our power to protect them, make sure that any threat to them is mitigated. Clearly, we do have nationals in Iraq and in the region, and their safety is paramount. But in terms of the reason this was taken, I think the US has laid out a compelling case. The legality of that is for others to determine, certainly not for me. But we have to keep in mind that the main target in the region is, of course, Daesh. And that's why our troops are in Iraq right now. It is assisting the Iraqi government in dealing with Daesh, which, whilst it may be limited geographically because of recent successes, is still present and constitutes a clear and present danger.
Well, indeed, 400 British troops have been in the country, in Iraq, obviously neighbouring Iran, training local units on how to tackle Islamic State. They're effectively going to have to abandon that training mission now. We know that the Iran has basically, and Iraq has ordered American troops out. British troops will be following very soon, do you think?
Well, the Iraqi parliament has voted for that, but actually whether US troops remain in the country or not is a matter, of course, for the Iraqi government. I think the message to the Iraqi government would be that we're making real progress in tackling Daesh. That is our principal concern in Iraq right now, and the destabilizing activities of Iran, it has to be said, its malign influence throughout the whole of the region is not helping in that endeavor. And I'm very sure that the Iraqi government, which we're close to, will be pondering those issues very closely over the days ahead. And I strongly expect it not to take the sort of rash decisions that you've described.
And in terms also of British tourists in the Middle East, obviously Brits told you to leave Iran. Rather very few of them there, I would have thought. But British tourists have been returning to Egypt, as that's been regarded as perhaps a safer place to travel to in the Middle East. Warnings now from the Foreign Office they could be at risk. People planning a holiday, Sharm el-Sheikh, Hurghada, places like that. There's diving resorts, beach resorts. Is it safe for Brits to travel to those places? And what should Brits do who are already there?
Well, I'm pleased to say that our advice for Sharm has changed positively recently. But what I would advise people to do is to keep a close eye on FCO travel advice, which is published on the gov.uk website. It's very comprehensive, and it will enable people to make an adequate risk assessment for wherever they're travelling in the world, and particularly in relation, obviously, to Iraq and Iran at the moment. That's very pertinent, but it's relevant to every country.
And let's talk about also the Iranian British mother being held in Iranian jail, Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe. We're going to be talking to her husband, Richard, after 9 o'clock. He's been talking since this drone attack on Soleimani, and big concern that, of course, that any chances now of negotiating the release of his wife early from jail after serving a 5-year sentence now looking pretty unlikely. What do you think the repercussions will be for Nazanin?
Well, I think the way that Iran has managed dual nationals, and Nazanin in particular, but there are others, has been appalling, truly appalling. We must not see nation-states using people as political pawns in this way. It is completely and wholly unacceptable, and we make that very clear to our interlocutors. We have made clear on every available opportunity the need for Nazanin to return to her family. It's a constant piece of work in the Foreign Office, and the Prime Minister is closely engaged as well. I would appeal to the Iranian government to show some kindness, particularly as we enter this new year period, towards the dual nationals that it holds spuriously. It knows it's holding them spuriously, and to desist from this activity. I think it would be extremely positive if we had some good news on that front in this year, so that those who are being unlawfully detained and unreasonably detained by the government in Iran are permitted to rejoin their families.
Okay, well, let's talk about what's going to be happening in the next couple of days. The Prime Minister's already, after landing back in London last night, holding talks with Donald Trump, with the French President Emmanuel Macron and the German Chancellor Angela Merkel. He's going to be giving, either he or the Foreign Secretary a statement in the Commons yesterday when MPs returned to Parliament. What likely actions are we going to be looking at in terms of working with the Americans, or perhaps trying to pull the Americans back from the brink in terms of the Iran nuclear pact? The Iranians have said that deal is effectively torn up now. What is going to be top of the to-do list?
Well, the top of the to-do list is urging de-escalation right now. And with Germany and France in particular, the UK has been at the forefront of trying to support the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, that we hoped would enable Iran to have a way back in from the cold. Now, the news about Iran taking the next stage in its non-compliance with JCPOA is very bad news indeed. With our interlocutors, and particularly with the E3, that is to say Germany and France, we will be working very closely in the days ahead to try to get that back on track and try to salvage it, because ultimately the solution has to be a political one, and ultimately it has to involve Iran stepping back from the malign activity that it's embarked upon in the region, particularly in relation to terroristic activities and to the support of proxies such as Hezbollah and the Houthi in Yemen. All of this has to be dealt with going forward, and in particular the Trump-Macron initiative needs to be got back on track so that we have a clear way forward for Iran, so that Iran once again can hold its head up high amongst nations. It's a great country and a strong tradition, history and culture, and it needs to be there with the rest of us. But it can't be for as long as it continues to embark upon this malign activity, which is destabilising the region.
Labour's ruling body, the NEC, will meet today to agree the timetable for the party's leadership race to take over from Jeremy Corbyn, agree the rules and the actual timetable for that contest. 5 MPs have so far entered the running to succeed Jeremy Corbyn. They are Clive Lewis, Lisa Nandy, Jess Phillip, Sir Keir Starmer and Emily Thornberry. Rebecca Long-Bailey and Ian Lavery are also expected to put their hats into the ring as well. Let's talk about what's going to happen with Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle now. Good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Very well indeed. I suppose my first question to you in relation to those who've put their names forward already or are likely to put their names forward, the videos we've seen, the interviews on the Sunday morning shows and the like. As someone who was really very much, not only just very much a Brexiteer, but also someone who was very concerned about Jeremy Corbyn as a future Prime Minister, with his fitness for office on various different grounds. Is there any evidence that from what we've seen so far that anyone in the Labour Party has learnt the lessons of what happened on December the 12th?
Well, the lessons are going to be a long journey, and I think the point, I guess, of the leadership election is that different candidates will put forward their different perspectives of what went wrong. My view is that anyone that says it was one thing, anyone that says it was just Brexit, anyone that says it was just Jeremy Corbyn, for whatever reason, maybe he had been destroyed in the media or he had destroyed himself, you can look at it either way, anyone that says it was just because Labour hadn't organised properly in the north, etc., actually is not putting their money in the right place. It was a combination of things, and the leadership candidates have to lay out what level of each of those things they think contributed and what they will do on each of those things to try and resolve the failure. And it was a failure. Anyone that says it wasn't a failure...
You didn't win the argument, as it was claimed. You lost the election, and that was kind of the only race ongoing. But, I mean, in terms of some of the front runners, I mean, Sir Keir Starmer was interviewed yesterday. He's a shadow Brexit secretary. He's very much, judging from his video, bidding for those left momentum supporters, bidding on the left. Very much someone who was on the Remain side. He's talked about the Brexit issue in interviews yesterday. He was asked, what he thought was a problem, and his view was that there should have been a clearer stance on Brexit. Quite clearly, although he didn't enunciate this, quite clearly he means a clear Remain stance. We know Jess Phillips, another, I think she's running third in the list of possible winners of that contest so far. She has been talking about how she could campaign conceivably to rejoin the EU. It doesn't appear that, and Emily Thornberry as well, it doesn't appear that lessons have been learnt on Brexit.
I think you're being a little unfair. There is an analysis that is a fair enough analysis that on Brexit, it wasn't that we were just too Remainy or too Levy, but that we weren't clear enough. That is an analysis, but it's not an analysis that if Ian Lavery throws his hat into the ring, that he will put forward. His analysis will be something that we were too Remainy and we need to be more Levy. At least in Nandy was someone who supported a deal to leave the European Union and thought that we should have been clearer in supporting a deal and possibly even one of the government's deals, and got amendments to it, that we would have been happy with. So I think it's unfair to say that everyone is having the same view. Jess Phillips' view of rejoin is vastly different from Keir Starmer's view of we now need to procure a kind of customs union single market arrangement. So everyone actually in Europe is actually putting a slightly different nuanced view forward already. And I think that's very healthy. So I don't think it's fair, and I haven't declared for one of the candidates yet. So I'm trying to be kind of fair enough in all.
Yeah, I appreciate that. But in terms of the Corbynistas, now it was very much the view that Rebecca Long-Bailey was the anointed one. I barely saw a single photo op where we had either John McDonnell or Jeremy Corbyn on a stage without Rebecca Long-Bailey by the side. And there seems to be some rowing back. I mean, she hasn't declared her formal candidacy yet, although she is expected to do so. But it was long expected that she would be the one who would get the sort of, the crown from the Corbynistas. And now it looks like there's quite a lot of infighting on the left. Ian Lavery perhaps might be getting that support instead. What's happened there? Is this the left eating itself?
No, I think it is exactly what you said earlier on. It is that there are different views on Europe, but also on how we organise the campaign and also how we sold the manifesto. I think everyone agrees broadly, maybe apart from Jess Phillips, but we'll see what she has to say, that the manifesto was a good manifesto in principle, but actually how it was presented in practice was too much like a shopping list, if you understand what I mean. But different people on the left are saying, wanting to fix it in a slightly different way, and so that's why there are different people. Clive Lewis was a Corbynista, put his name forward, so's Rebecca Long-Bailey, and so is Ian Lavery. And actually that is healthy as well, because if it was just a case in a leadership election where you have the two pre-arranged blocks, the Progress group, which kind of represents Blair's legacy and was kind of Blair's little lobby group, and the Momentum kind of types that represented Jeremy's, fighting it out, it would be a rather stale and actually probably unhelpful election. The Labour Party and we need to put all ideas into the ring, and we need to come out with someone who is going to be able to lead us, because I don't think it's healthy to have a weak opposition generally.
No, I absolutely. I 100% agree with you on that. It's in everyone's interest who's a Democrat that we do have a strong, viable leadership. Do you think then it's a wrong decision of Jeremy Corbyn not to stand down sooner rather than later, to actually to make way for an interim leader? Obviously, it's very difficult. Tom Watson no longer being a deputy leader, so there wasn't an obvious person to replace, and otherwise it was thought that John McDonnell, and he said he wouldn't do it. But would it be better for him not, for instance, be up against Boris Johnson at Prime Minister's questions for the next 6 weeks?
It's just a situation that we have to find ourselves in at the moment. It's a nice kind of soundbite to say, go immediately or whatever, but as soon as you think it through for a few seconds, it's just practically not very possible. Because as soon as you talk, because we don't have a deputy leader, and that's what normally the deputy leader would do, and we've already now got a process for a new leader. So as soon as you talk about then Jeremy or anyone going earlier than that, what you actually are talking about is suddenly having to put in a proxy race in where someone, whether it's the NEC or the PLP or whether it's a wider group of people, having to then decide who a temporary leader will be, and you have a whole drama around that, and that becomes even more distracting and probably weakens the opposition even more. So it's possibly an undesirable situation, but it's one that you just have to live with if you think through the alternative.
Okay.
And I understand why some people, in the heat of the moment, kind of say, well, we just need to do X, Y, and Z. But actually, as soon as you think it through, as you kind of already were starting to think it through there where you said Tom Watson had gone, there's just not really much of an alternative. You have to live with it, a little bit of pain, hopefully for a lot of gain.
None of us really is as much of a Brexiteer as my next guest. And he's someone who wants to have a proper celebration on the 31st of January when we do actually finally at 11 p.m. that day leave the European Union. And that is the Brexit Party leader, Nigel Farage. Good morning to you, Nigel.
Good morning.
Good morning. Very, very happy New Year to you. This is a very different start to the year than last year, where we faced all those battles, legal battles and commons battles about whether or not Brexit was going to happen. Now the battle ahead is just about the sort of deal we get in terms of free trade and the likes and our relationship with Europe. But in terms of whether or not we are going to become a free and independent sovereign state, taking back control of our actual laws and our money, etc., that is going to happen on the 31st of January. And you have been so instrumental in this. You want to have something of a celebration on the night to mark it, don't you?
Well, I do. And I remember so vividly New Year's Day 2019, thinking to myself, this is a disaster. There's a second referendum coming down the tracks. Parliament was moving ever more closely towards it. And I really thought this time last year that Brexit may not happen. So I think 2019 was the year when people actually spoke. We are going to leave. It's 99.9% certain that we are going to leave on the 31st.
There's still some doubt in your mind.
Well, I mean, there's 0.1% doubt because what no one's talking about is the fact that the European Parliament has to approve. So that the final vote on this will not be in the Commons, it'll be in the European Parliament under the EU treaties. And look, I think they will approve it, but Mr Verhofstadt before Christmas made one or two threatening noises. I've still got grave reservations about the document itself, but since then, during the election campaign and in the Conservative manifesto, Boris Johnson has said two things very, very clearly. Number one, there would be no further extension to the transition period, and we absolutely will be out everything by the end of this year. And number two, even more crucially, he said we're not going to accept regulatory alignment, meaning that we won't have to accept European rules on everything from financial services to fisheries. Now, provided Boris Johnson holds true to his word, we will, during the course of this year, genuinely be a free, independent country. And yep, I think that is worth celebrating. And let's be honest, 11 p.m. on the 31st of this month, as Big Ben strikes 11, we will, after 45 years, have left the European club. So, yeah, I'm planning a cross-party celebration. I've applied to the Mayor of London under an organisation called Leave Means Leave. And what we want to do, Julia, is put up some staging. We'll have a few speeches, we'll have some singing, we'll have some music. It'll be a genuine celebration.
Well, this is it, of course. I attended that Leave Means Leave rally and spoke at that back on the 29th of March last year. And again, a cross-party affair it was. People very much from the left all the way to the right. And it was a really, I have to say, very feel-good event, despite the fact there was a lot of anger at the fact that we weren't then leaving on that first date that we thought we were going to leave on. But you want to have sort of up to 10,000 Leave supporters, so they won't have to be Brexit Party supporters. It'll be across the board. Anyone who's been supporting Brexit, welcome.
Look, Leave Means Leave is a non-party organisation that has lobbied ever since 2016 for the referendum to happen. And yes, you spoke on that stage with us on March 29th, as did Paul Embry, a trade unionist, as did Kate Hoey, who was then a Labour MP. So this is not about left or right. This is to celebrate. And I tell you what it really celebrates. It celebrates a victory for the little people, for ordinary people, because the entire establishment just a few years ago did not even want to discuss Brexit. I remember a time when there wasn't a single MP in the House of Commons who backed Brexit. Every big business, every trade union, all the press, everybody supported staying in the EU. And this victory has really come because thousands of ordinary folk up and down this country have campaigned for years. And it is a remarkable thing. It just shows you, that if you live in a democracy, anything is possible.
Well, do you think that victory is? And I know, you've said you have reservations about this, the deal that Boris Johnson has done, and everyone's been very aware of that. But is this victory even sweeter for the fact that it was a 3.5-year battle? Because I don't think any of us actually thought on the 24th of June 2016, when we woke up to the Leave victory, that we would be battling 3.5 years on to get that to happen. And we would have to go through all of those different votes, the European elections and 2 general elections, and all of his other votes to get, and all those battles in the House of Commons and in the courts to get there. Is the victory sweeter for that battle?
In one way, yes. I think that if I hadn't launched the Brexit Party, if I hadn't founded the Brexit Party back in February, reset the agenda, then Mrs May would still be in number 10 and would be heading towards a second referendum. So on a personal level, I'm very pleased about it. But there's another level at which actually what's happened is dreadful, because so many former prime ministers and very senior figures in our country have for 3.5 years refused to accept the principle of loser's consent. Namely, if you lose an election, you may not like it, but you accept it. And I think they've done untold damage to this country in the last 3.5 years. Firstly, in terms of the economy and the way in which we could have been moving on. And secondly, in terms of our global standing. So a lot of damage has been done. But hey, do you know what? On the 31st of this month, let's celebrate. It's going to be a huge, great, historic moment, the biggest, certainly, political event in your life and my lifetimes. And thereafter, do everything we can to encourage the Prime Minister to be tough.
Well, indeed. Now, we have to ask whether, how much we do move on. We've got Labour leadership candidates who are already talking about, like Jess Phillips, possibly campaigning to rejoin the EU. We've got Sir Keir Starmer, the shadow Brexit secretary, who's one of the leading candidates, possibly the front runner, talking about how the Labour Party should have had a clearer position on Brexit. We know he doesn't mean pro-Brexit, he means remain. Does the country move on? Do we on the 1st of February, do we stop being Remainers and Leavers and we move on?
Do you know, I was with Alistair Campbell yesterday. I mean, nobody has been a more vociferous voice for Remain. I mean, he's been the guy behind the People's Vote. He's been handling all the press, and he's a very effective political and press operator. And even Alistair Campbell says, "Look, I accept the fact we're leaving. The battle now is about the terms upon which we leave." So there is not going to be a second referendum. That is finished. That is over. And I think that if the next Labour leader hints that at some point we might rejoin the European Union, they will find a shrinking minority of this population that support that view, and the vast majority of us saying, for goodness sake, the war is over, let's just get on with the rest of our lives.
We'll be bringing them out of the jungle for the next 30 years, won't we? Break the news to them. Can I ask you, you talked about rebranding the Brexit Party to the Reform Party. Are you going to go ahead with those plans to keep Boris Johnson on the Brexit straight and narrow?
Well, I mean, one thing that we've learned in the last 3.5 years is that we have a parliament that is not necessarily representative of the opinion in this country. We have an electoral system that is clearly hugely out of date. We have postal voting massively open to fraud and intimidation. We have a system of patronage and peerages whereby friends get rewarded, enemies get bought off and get chucked in the House of Lords, that frankly I think has no place in 21st century Britain. So I do think that the time and the mood for genuine political change and reform, I think it's there, I think it's real. What I've got to decide, I suppose, is, I mean, remember, it was in 1993 that I put myself forward to stand for UKIP in the Eastleigh by-election. I mean, I've been doing this for 27 years, and I've, and you know me well enough to know I've been absolutely dedicated to it 24/7 for that whole period of time. So I do think a campaign for political reform is vital. I think the Brexit Party should morph at some point this year into a reform party. I guess what I've got to decide is, do I want to spend the next 10 or 15 years of my life, once again, trying to climb Everest without crampons?
Just finally, you did mention the House of Lords there. Can we just lay this to rest once and for all? Have you or have you not been offered a knighthood and or a peerage? And if you were, would you turn them down?
Back in 2016, after the referendum, there was some very friendly talk about the fact that I really ought to be going to the House of Lords, and would I be, up for it? And I said no, absolutely not. And I realised that if I had accepted that, I would have been out of the game. I wouldn't have been able to launch the Brexit Party, given that they messed it up the way they did. And I always said, I'm not for sale. I'm not for sale. So, no, that isn't what I want to do.
There will never be Sir Nigel Farage or Lord Farage. Never going to happen. Categorically, yes or no?
Anyone that ever says never is very, very, very stupid, Julia. But I have no interest in doing that.
Okay.
I think the House of Lords needs to go. I think we need in the 21st century, let's have an elected upper chamber. That would be a lot more democratic.
Right now, though, let's turn our attention to just one particular aspect of what's happened over the weekend with the American drone strike on Qassem Soleimani, the Iranian general, effectively the number 2 in command in terms of power in Iran, and his death and how his death is going to affect one particular British Iranian woman. She, of course, is Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, serving a jail term in Iran on trumped-up charges of spying. Her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, has been campaigning to get her home and hoping negotiations with the regime could lead to her being returned to the UK. However, obviously big concerns now that with the upping of tensions with Iran, that is less and less likely. Well, we're joined now by Richard Ratcliffe this morning. Good morning to you, Richard.
Good morning, Julia.
I can only imagine your reaction when you heard about the drone strike and your concern about how this would affect you, your family, your wife. What is your expectation in terms of what the repercussions could be for Nazanin?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was a real shock when it happened, and disbelief, and similarly speaking to her on the phone. It's, probably the initial response was, gosh, I don't know what this does mean. And you're right, we've been looking for negotiations for a long, long time, campaigning for a long, long time, had some false dawns, some progress and some setbacks. This is a big setback. I think in terms of what it means, it clearly means that there'll be some real tensions between Iran and the West more generally. Nazanin is held by the Revolutionary Guard. It was their leader that was killed. It was the Revolutionary Guard that were clearly blocking Nazanin's release anyway. I would think if things don't deteriorate, then we've done well. But certainly I had no crumbs of comfort to offer her on the phone. So.
Well, she had a 5-year jail sentence. She's already, a couple of years into that. You brought your daughter home late last year. And I wondered if there was a significance in your decision to do that, because, of course, she was able to see her mother, once a week, once a fortnight, and obviously great comfort for Nazanin to see your daughter. But you chose to bring her home. This now could be a very, very long wait for your daughter and your wife to see each other again.
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, on the one hand, I'm really relieved that Gabriella is out, as things have deteriorated significantly since late October when we brought her back. But you're right. I told Nazanin, listen, I think this could be something that will trigger things, and maybe it's a few more weeks, maybe Christmas, maybe a little bit after. And now we're looking at a very different scenario. And luckily, Gabriella's young enough to not really appreciate it. But yes, for Nazanin sitting in a prison cell, feeling like she's, maybe she'll never get out. This is a very hard time.
Well, indeed. I mean, I was going to say a couple of years, but it's 2016 that your wife was arrested at Tehran airport as she was looking to leave the country. And now, have you had any conversations with the Foreign Office, with the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, who has been trying to help fight your case for you?
Yeah, not since all this happened. We had some contact with the Foreign Office over the Christmas period because Nazanin was on hunger strike, so they was in touch then. I think now we obviously are looking very clearly to meet with the Prime Minister, to meet with the Foreign Office as soon as possible, and really to make it clear, both to Iranians and, in fairness to the American administration, that ordinary people should not become collateral damage in this, and that he needs to worry about the British hostages that are held. But Donald Trump needs to worry about the American hostages that are held, and that whatever the strategy going forward is, it needs to be with a mindful awareness of the fact that there are ordinary people caught up in the middle of this.
Well, indeed. I mean, Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, has actually called on the Iranians to show effectively that they are willing to engage by releasing Nazanin early. But again, this is not just an issue of her getting early release. It's whether or not more trumped-up charges are brought, which means that she is sentenced to far more than the 5 years she's currently serving.
Yeah, that's right. There's obviously, I'm grateful that he's making clear publicly that she remains a priority. We are looking for an early release since she's eligible, but that latest request for parole got rejected just before Christmas. And there is that second court case hanging over her that I think the closer we get to the end of the sentence, the more likely that is to be added on to the end. So we're looking to see if there's any immediate reactions. We're looking to see if there's anything longer term. And I think the Foreign Office are watching to make sure no one else gets taken.
Yeah, indeed. Richard Ratcliffe, well, we wish you the very best. Do send our best to your wife, Nazanin. I can't imagine what you and your family are going through after reading about those reports of the Soleimani drone strike. I really appreciate you talking to us at Talk Radio. Let's turn our attentions to, I suppose, the big picture rather than dealing with just the effect on one family of that decision of the Americans to issue that drone strike on Qassem Soleimani, the Iranian general. Mark Almond joins us now. He's director of the Oxford Crisis Research Institute. Good morning to you, Mark.
Good morning.
Good morning. There's been a lot of talk over the weekend that this is all the start of World War III. This is going to escalate tensions, oil prices going up, troops being ordered to leave Iraq and neighbouring Iraq as a result of what's happened. How significant was this decision to take out Soleimani? And has it actually made the world and the region a less safe place?
I think it has. I mean, the Americans have an argument for saying that General Soleimani was the centre of a web of paramilitary and even terrorist activities that were causing trouble from Lebanon through Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, and so on, and that therefore his role was malign from their point of view and from the West's point of view in general. On the other hand, like a lot of decisions in real life in politics, there's no neat answer. So the Americans hope that this, in a sense, will be a wake-up call to Iran to step back. The risk, of course, is that Iran will feel, partly for religious and cultural reasons, that it has to show that it's not going to be pushed around and that there's a strong desire for revenge that we see being pumped out by Iranian media from the huge crowds in the streets. That said, it seems to me that even if you think that what the Americans did was not wise or right, we are where we are. And I think one of the problems is we can't turn back time. So we have to ask ourselves in the big picture, if there's a clash between America and Iran, who would we want to come out on top? Who would we in the West, in Britain and so on? And what is the best way, in a way, to avoid that clash? And it seems to me that if the allies of the United States, Britain and the other European countries are seen to be split from America, that actually raises the risks of a wider conflict much more than if Iran, however much they don't want to swallow what has happened, if Iran finds itself facing a very broad alliance of countries saying, do not go down the path of taking revenge, do not go down the path of terrorism, there is a chance that this situation can be calmed down. But it's, of course, a very explosive situation because it's not just Iran. We have to remember it's also Iraq.
Yes. But again, this is the thing. You say it's an explosive situation, but a lot of the people who are saying, oh, this is starting a conflagration, this is all out of the blue, are they being a bit disingenuous, pretending that it wasn't already, we weren't already in that situation? It was, we've already seen, the proxy wars that are being fought in the Middle East. We've seen numerous attacks, the attack on the American embassy only recently, all orchestrated by Soleimani. He's responsible for numerous, thousands upon thousands of innocent civilian deaths. That actually there comes a point when, if America is a player on the world scene and in the Middle East, there has to be some sort of reprisal of some sort. Otherwise, you leave the power vacuum that President Obama did, which led to what's happened in Syria, which is that, well, what a surprise, another world power like Russia moves in.
Yeah, that is the problem. I think the dilemma for, if I put it this way, decent people is that the world isn't on the whole run by decent people. And we, for all sorts of reasons, people may find President Trump's way of doing things, particularly his way of expressing himself, discomforting. But we have to remember that there are people quietly going about their business which are in many ways much more dangerous and threatening. I mean, to be quite honest, most people had never heard of General Soleimani. Yeah. Most people don't actually realize that somebody who was extremely quiet, very much behind the scenes, was pulling many more strings than they knew about. And similarly, we tend to find that there are governments in the world that are much less likely to tweet their intentions, they're much less likely to express themselves volubly, but they are doing things. And I think this is the great danger of the larger-than-life personality of Donald Trump. It may be actually to the disadvantage of his own policies that it distracts attention from the fact that he isn't the only player in the game.